And I'd like to welcome everybody to Roots for Health, or is it Roots for
Roots
Health?
to Health.
Roots to Health. Can't even remember the name of my own podcast. And today we've discussed a little bit about protein, a little bit about fat, and I'm going to hit the third major macronutrient that we have. And when you think about macronutrients and how we look at our diet, what you've got to remember is that because we have just these three macronutrients, when you make a change in one, that'll automatically somehow make a change in one or both of the others. Okay? I say that because when we're talking about protein, and I don't know if I mentioned this statistic before, but generally speaking, protein consists of somewhere between 10 to 15% of our total calories in the diet. Okay, for a normal, healthy individual, that's about the right range. There's, again, some flexibility with that. Generally speaking, with fats, as I mentioned in the last one, we're talking in your average healthy adult with no metabolic disease, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 35% of your total calories should come from fats. All right? So what does that leave? Well, if you've got about, let's say on the top end, 15% protein and let's say 30% fat, that leaves 55% carbohydrates. Aren't carbs the enemy?
It's always so taboo in the standard diet.
Holy cow. What about all these low carb things and, the keto diet and the carnivore diet and carbs are bad? Wrong answer.
Wrong answer.
And here's the deal, all right? We're talking about a sustainable eating habit, okay? I know for a fact keto is not sustainable, all right? There's a condition known as the keto flu.
Yeah.
Okay? There is no condition called the carb flu. Okay? Our bodies
Maybe
are...
a funnel cake carb.
Right. Our bodies are made to burn carbs. Okay? That's what we do. Carbs are our major source of energy.
And you'll see it when you get on the right carbs. You'll feel it. You'll know it.
Oh, yeah.
Your body will tell you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the right answer for our bodies.
Nothing is sustainable when it loads your whole system down on proteins and then eliminates carbs.
Right.
It's like you can't function like that.
It's just not, And I would offer that in my mind, a keto diet is setting you up for death.
It is.
Now, there are some things that a keto diet can, on a short-term basis, seem to help with.
That's important for people to see because they'll always say things like that. Well, my numbers went down.
Yeah,
But
there are some things that initially seem to get better. A keto diet can promote a fairly rapid weight loss. I would contend that a rapid weight loss is not healthy for you.
yeah.
Okay? Right. A sustained, slow and steady weight loss to the tune of about 2 to 4 pounds a month is a healthy, sustainable weight loss, okay? Why am I talking about this with carbs? Well, there is a form of carb that is the enemy, okay? The good carbs... There is? The good carbs are complex carbohydrates, okay? And that comes in the form primarily of fiber and starches. There's some amount of simple carbohydrates, if they come straight from the plant, that are also healthy, okay? The problem comes when we get into the refined carbohydrates, refined sugar, refined flour, okay? Those are really some of the biggest offenders.
So isn't it like the complex carbs has that fiber in it where the body knows how to kind of break it down and so it's taking a little bit of that away?
Exactly. And like we talked about with the production of oils with fats, all right? The problem is, they use, as for an example, we'll take wheat, okay? Wheat, the whole grain wheat, is good for you, okay? And it's got several layers, and some of them contain more fiber, and some of them contain more starches and micronutrients and all of that. The problem is with refined flour, they take 2 of those layers away, they strip away all the goodness, and all you're left with is this glob of carbohydrate that gets immediately absorbed into your bloodstream and causes sugar spikes.
And
That's a problem.
When you talk about a little growing human, you talk about a toddler or a baby, it's like that's so important for the little brains to be getting the right things to feed. I mean, nutrition is everything.
That's
for
right.
that growing child.
Refined sugar does the same thing.
Yeah.
It's absorbed directly into the bloodstream, causes sugar spikes in your bloodstream, which causes an insulin spike in your bloodstream.
Inflammation.
And inflammation. You know, insulin is definitely a hugely important hormone in our body, but you don't want too much of it.
Which can you touch on just a little bit? I know we've talked about this before, but when someone's taking all those carbs out and they're high protein, that they're setting themselves up, they might not have blood sugar spikes because they're not taking a carb in, but they have a lot of insulin resistance.
That's right.
Because the fat cells.
Yeah. So
I may be getting you off topic.
No. I mean, I think you're exactly right in terms of, you know, a lot of diabetics have been taught by either physicians or other people who don't understand where insulin resistance comes from, that you need to avoid carbs and you need to focus on fats
and avoid fruit
and protein and avoid fruit.
Right.
Well, the problem with that is over time, that fat leaches into our muscle and liver cells and creates insulin resistance.
It blocks the insulin.
It blocks the insulin. So in a type 2 diabetic, that's all that's going on. We've experienced the standard American diet with 60 to 70% of our calories coming from fat. It's gotten into places where it doesn't belong. It blocks our insulin receptors. The problem is type 1 diabetics who don't make insulin as the cause of their initial problem get stuck on that, and then they develop insulin resistance as well.
Crazy chaotic sugars.
So yes, so when they develop insulin resistance and they don't make their own, what that means for them is they keep having to increase the dose of insulin.
Hence mastering diabetes.
Hence the book Mastering Diabetes. I'll put a plug in for that. That's where I learned a lot about my sugar metabolism.
2 type 1 diabetics.
Yeah, the authors are 2 type 1 diabetics who were having trouble with their blood sugars. And Cyrus Kambata went and got his PhD in biochemical nutrition and figured all this out, that what we need as diabetics, either type 1 or type 2, is a diet very low in fat to reverse our insulin resistance.
And he eats a tremendous amount of fruit. He lives in a tropical area, and you are living proof of this. I've watched it.
He eats tons of carbs, and his insulin dependence has dropped dramatically.
That is so important for moms that have kids that have insulin.
It's huge.
Yeah, both type 1.
So and we've digressed a little bit about the specific
I got you off
carb.
topic.
That's quite all right, but it's a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
But all this is related to kind of carbs, and so we're talking about kind of the title of this is talking about demystifying the plant-based energy for life. So again, welcome to this section of the podcast. I'm a little late in that, but bottom line is, as we've discussed, I mean, carbs are not bad for you. Carbs are what our body thrives on. And as we've said, the issue is the processed carbs. And as I mentioned before, for proteins, we get 4 calories per gram of protein we take. We also get 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate we take. And we get 9 calories per gram of fat that we take in.
Yeah.
So what are the types of carbs? I've mentioned them a little bit. There's the simple carbs, which are glucose and fructose, basically single molecules. And then the complex carbs, which are the starches and the fibers. These are primarily found in whole grains and legumes and vegetables. So, commonly held myth, carbs make you gain weight. Not true. Okay. The combination of too much fat and refined carbs will make you gain weight. Guaranteed.
I mean, I almost don't want to call that a carb. You know, refined carbs are so beaten down that it's like to call it food even is a little bit of a stretch.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
I saw
right.
something last week that said 100 years ago, 90% of what is in our grocery stores didn't exist. And 100 years ago, 90% of our chronic disease did not exist.
There it is.
And there is a correlation there.
There is a definite correlation. So where do we find these healthy carbs? So the primary sources are going to be whole grains, to include quinoa and oats and brown rice and farro and millet. These things are high in fiber, high in B vitamins, all kinds of goodness for you. You can also find a good amount of healthy complex carbohydrates in lentils and chickpeas and all kinds of things like that. And then there's the starchy options, to include potatoes and sweet potatoes
My
and
favorite.
peas and corn. So,
Something I really realized that helped me the most was to get the textures of the foods we used to like.
yes.
To be able to get that crunch. I miss the crunch of things. So being
Absolutely.
able to slice. I'm going to be doing some carrot bacon pretty soon.
Nice. Well, and then another source of the more simple carbs are going to be your fruits.
Mhm.
And again, these are not the enemy. I mean, to point back to Cyrus Khambatta of Mastering Diabetes, he does not get blood sugar spikes just because he eats a banana or he eats an orange. Okay, and that's because his body knows how to metabolize that. Our bodies, again, we're made to metabolize carbs.
Yeah.
They are good for us, just not the wrong kind of carbs.
And not that I'm totally against juicing, but juicing does take out the fiber, and it is a little bit more of a hit to your liver.
It
And
is.
it's not the thing to do on the daily. I do occasionally
Yeah.
do it just for fun, but
Again, if you've got a healthy liver,
Yeah.
it's not a problem
Yeah.
to do sometimes.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun. So other options for carbs, you're going to be looking at whole grain bread, pasta, and sprouted grains. I would offer you want to be careful with some of those, because particularly the breads and the pastas, you got to watch where their flours are coming from. The enriched flours, again, they're not going to be really good for you.
Yeah.
All right, particularly if you're a type 2 diabetic. What I have found, like it or hate it, I love it actually. Ezekiel bread has been my savior. I was missing bread for a
Yeah.
long time, and finally found that Ezekiel bread has a glycemic index of 36.
and your blood sugar just doesn't seem to be affected by it.
And I
Yeah.
toast almost on the daily now.
Yep, that's wonderful.
And it's fabulous. So, all right. So, what's the big deal with carbs and how do they affect our blood sugar? Well, like I said, it gets absorbed in, and our cells burn these carbohydrates to produce energy for motion and everything. And when we take in a few too many carbs, as I'd mentioned, our body has a system for that. I mentioned that in one of the last two podcasts, but our body has a system for that, and we store extra carbohydrates in the form of a substance called glycogen. And what glycogen does then is, when we reach a point, if we're exercising or haven't eaten for a while or whatever, and our blood sugar starts to drop a little bit, then our body mobilizes the right enzymes, and it breaks off some of that glycogen, which then produces glucose, which is what our body needs.
Right.
Our brain functions on glucose.
Absolutely.
So that's
And it's so important to know how one affects the other, as far as like a fruit. You can't just say, okay, a fruit never elevates your blood sugar. It does if you have insulin resistance because your fat content is too high or you have weight to lose and things like that.
exactly.
They really do affect each other.
They do. All right.
But it's really important where you get your information, because I know a lot of diabetics that have been told they hadn't had fruit in 15 years.
You bet.
And it's like the fruit's not the enemy.
Yeah, fruit's not the enemy.
That's
Well,
a short side
and
of
so as we had talked about a little bit ago, the average healthy person's diet should be ballpark 15% protein, 30% fat, 55% carbohydrate. Well, as a type 2 diabetic, what I've found is working very well for me, if I can keep my fat content to 10% and my protein content to about 15%, that leaves me 75% of my diet is complex carbohydrates.
Woo!
75%. So that's where I get my stuff, man.
And it's like you're lifting weights and you're doing just fine with all of that. And chronometer, when you're like doing this and if someone's like, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming, you can actually change what chronometer says because they're going to say something different to the standard diet that you need this much more protein. You can change your settings to where it's already in there. And yes, it's not fun initially to put your recipes in, but you can share. We share recipes. It'll go on both of our things. So that might really help somebody if the Daily Dozen is not necessarily something that I get every day, but it's kind of a good way to get around it. Dr. Greger's Daily Dozen app is a, kind of a way to get an idea of what you need.
So I would say as a take-home point for the Carbs podcast, just remember that carbs are not the enemy.
Right.
What is the enemy? It's the processed carb. Processed foods are the scourge of the world.
Yeah.
And I should say, throw a little bit about fiber in here too, because fiber is a carbohydrate. Mm-hmm. All right. Why is fiber so important? Well, I've recently made a short video for my website on ozarkpediatrics.org that discussed a little bit about fiber. So I won't rehash that whole thing, but suffice it to say that our intestinal microbiome needs all different kinds of fiber to be healthy. Mm-hmm. And
super important.
Super important. I like to, what I've heard is that it's now in some circles being referred to, our microbiome and our intestinal tract is being referred to as a second brain, because when our microbes come in contact with and digest the right types of fiber, they create all kinds of chemical communicators. Most importantly that I've learned about, there's probably more, but the one that's the hot topic these days is short chain fatty acids, which then communicate with your brain for mood stabilization, intellectual function, communicates with all your glands for hormone stabilization, just an infinite number.
It's been said that 90% of our body is made up of these bugs, and it's my understanding that if we're pounded by the omega-6s, we're losing a lot of those bugs because they're kind of
and so what I would say about that is, as I started this series with the protein and recognizing that most non-plant-based eaters will say, where do you get your protein? Well, my favorite question in response to that is, where do you get your fiber? And I like to refer back to Facebook because we learn everything from Facebook these days. But one of my favorite memes about this topic shows an empty hospital ward, and with all these empty beds, and the statement under it is, this is the number of people that have been hospitalized in the United States from protein shortage.
It's so true, though.
From lack of protein. And then next to that, it shows a hugely busy intensive care unit with people having lots of problems from heart disease and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And this is a picture of lack of fiber.
Yeah, it's so true.
Because lack of fiber is
it's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Is a big deal.
I think people think of it as for regularity, but it's like it is the brain, like you say, to your whole body.
That's right.
Yeah, we've seen that too.
So I would like to encourage everybody to eat your healthy carbs. And tune in to our website, ozarkpediatrics.org. At the top of the first page, you'll see a plant-based resources tab. And so we'll have all kinds of links there to plant-based eating stuff. And like I said, I'm creating some shorts for the website and other areas about all my plant-based experiences and little tidbits that hopefully everybody will get to tune
We have
into.
a Facebook community, so you can find that on the plant-based resource, so you can join that group. So because we just we want to help anybody who's in transition, who's trying to figure out for their kids, what's healthy diet. So.
Exactly. So in closing, carbs aren't the enemy.
That's right.
They're your body's best friend. Embrace the power of plant-based carbs and fuel your life. Thank you.